Morning, everyone.
Okay. Hello.
Can you guys hear me? Because I can't hear anyone else.
Yeah, we can hear you, Debbie.
Yes, there we go. Great. Good morning. So just to start and kick off this session this morning, my colleague Rodri is on the call and he will be joining. And this session will be all about measuring your climate change impact and just generally having a chat. I know you've done a lot of sessions on the business side of things and your value propositions and your pitching and all of those things. So we're now going to enter some of that green bit. So Rodri will take us through the course. I know that some Barclays colleagues are coming in at about 11 as well to talk about the Barclays Eagle Lab side of things. So hopefully this will be a useful session. It's one of the sort of two sessions that we have that will focus on the science and some of the technical stuff behind climate change and all of the bits and bobs, just to hopefully give everyone a bit of a grounding, a bit of background. Why are we all in this sector? What are we doing? Why do we care? What are the rules that we're all going to have to follow? What are the things that we can all be doing as individuals and businesses to help that? And maybe we can have some open discussions around some of the barriers and issues that you guys are facing so that we can have some conversations and brainstorm what we can all be doing to help. So with that, I'll hand over to Rodri, who's going to lead the course. Thanks.
Hi guys, how's it going? Thanks for joining us today. My name is Rodri Daniel, Innovation Officer at Menai Science Park. Can you all hear me okay? I assume so. Alrighty. So yeah, let's get right into it. So today we're going to be talking about, as Debbie said, measuring climate impact and what on earth the carbon literacy project is. As I said, I work for MSPAC, but I'm sure you're well aware of what we do by now. So I might skip this one and go straight into the carbon literacy project. So it's a bit of an odd one, but I guess the main message is that it's a large-scale educational program and run initially by Manchester University. And the idea is it's kind of accrediting courses that organizations can then teach their own staff members and actually then offer the course themselves to others. So it's a bit of like a viral franchising idea to spread the message of to become carbon literate, to educate our staff and therefore reduce emissions within the workforce or within any organization, public or third sector. And then the message gets spread out. So an organization like us at MSPAC, we became carbon literate by signing on to be a course, to attend a course. We then got a certificate to say that we are carbon literate individuals, so we can put that on our CV. And as an organization, then we could say that 80% of our workforce are carbon literate, so we could go for a carbon literate organizational certification. And eventually we started developing our own course so that we then offer that course to other companies, like be they tenants or SMEs around North Wales in the area. So yeah, the idea is to spread an awareness of the carbon costs and impacts of everyday activities and the ability and motivation to reduce emissions on an individual, community and organizational basis. So it's the knowledge and capacity required to create a positive shift in how humankind works. So if you do a full day's worth of carbon literacy learning, you can then be certified as carbon literate. And our course is linked to accredited and certified by the Carbon Literacy Project itself, which I think is still based out of Manchester University. So it's been running since about 2015, maybe a little bit earlier. And I think this is probably a few months old, but there's over 70,000 citizens certified, 5,000 organizations across many countries, and many different sectors. And part of the Carbon Literacy Project is that you make a pledge at the end of the session, the end of the day. And what we actually do is we run the course over 2 days, so 2 half days, as it were. And at the end of the second day or half day, you make a pledge as an individual and as a team member of your organization to make some sort of intervention or action that you then make a pledge to do. And that is an integral part of the Carbon Literacy Project. So there's 140,000 actions pledged so far and counting. And yeah, so hopefully, that's going to give a significant reduction in CO2 emissions overall for those organizations. So why become carbon literate? Well, research has shown that becoming carbon literate shows not only on an organization, but also on an individual basis, a carbon reduction saving of 5 to 15%. So if you add that up across the country, across any organization, across sectors, that's a significant reduction in carbon emissions. So that's the main message, really, is to spread that awareness, spread that literacy. It also means that you can become a better communicator yourself in disseminating the information that you've learned within the course. We all know there's a lot of misinformation or disinformation out there about climate change, and hopefully by attending the Carbon Literacy Project course, it will arm you with tips on better communicating these kinds of ideas and these kinds of interventions in a productive way. We all obviously have a shared responsibility. We all have a carbon footprint on an individual, organizational and national basis. And so we all have somewhat of a shared responsibility and an individual responsibility to reduce our carbon emissions. And so becoming carbon literate is a step in that direction. It's motivation to do so, and it also provides you with the tools and the knowledge to be able to make those changes and actions and understand the scientific context behind them. So hopefully by the end of the training, you'll have gained, if you were to do the full day course, which we do offer here in MSpark, if you did do that, the course, you will have hopefully gained an understanding of the basic science of climate change and the international and regional context of those policies. Gained an understanding of how climate change could affect your organization and industry. So an integral part of the course is it's very specific to the company and to the sector. So our course is geared towards North Wales-based SMEs, but any Welsh company can do it. But it's very specific to SMEs and how climate change will affect the SMEs and the SMEs' contribution to climate change and responsibility and common questions for SMEs to consider and steps to go about reducing carbon emissions. Hopefully you'll have explored the impact that SMEs can have on tackling climate change, create an action plan to help reduce your footprint of your organization, and explore strategies for influencing others to take action on climate change. So that's, I think, comes to the end of what we're going to talk about carbon literacy. Any questions so far? Or shall I move on? I'll move on then. Cool. So yeah, just wanted to talk a little bit about the context of climate change, I suppose. This might be a little bit simple, GCSE geography or something, but I thought we'd just quickly dive back in to have a quick recap of the background of why we're talking about this in the first place. We all have heard of climate change, but these terms like global warming, climate change, they're often interchangeable. Greenhouse gas effect, and sometimes we have to be sure about what exactly we're talking about, global warming, etc. So yeah, just to quickly talk about the greenhouse effect. So when we talk about global warming, it's due to the greenhouse effect, which is then causing climate change. So it all stems from the greenhouse effect in effect. So the natural greenhouse effect is a very good thing. Without it, the Earth would be about minus 18 degrees Celsius. Problem is that human anthropogenic activities are enhancing this effect by adding more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. So we obviously got our star, our sun, which is a nuclear fusion reactor in space. It's pumping out infrared radiation as well as all manner of the electromagnetic spectrum. But that infrared radiation is getting trapped in our atmosphere. And then it gets absorbed by the gases and by the surface. Some of it gets reflected into space, obviously, which is how we can see the planet from the moon or in space. And then that warms up the gases, and without it, there'd be a very cold place here. The problem is that we're obviously pumping more CO2 and more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere than we should be doing, than the natural carbon cycle. And so it's trapping in that extra latent heat, much like extra duvets, if you will, to simplify it. So if we're adding more greenhouse gases, we're adding more duvets on top, and it basically means there's a hotter environment, hotter atmosphere for the planet. When we talk about greenhouse gases, we're not just talking about carbon dioxide. The four main gases that we're talking about are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxides, and fluorinated gases. So this is just to have a quick look at why we talk about global warming potential and carbon dioxide equivalents. The problem is that just to show these molecular formulas for these gases and their common origins. When we talk about carbon, you might often see, methane being discussed as being a worse, more potent greenhouse gas, and that is because it actually absorbs heat, infrared radiation, much more than CO2 does because of its intermolecular forces. When we talk about global warming potential, a single molecule of methane can absorb 28 times more heat than a single molecule of, or a fixed unit or a mole of carbon dioxide. Not to get too technical, but a fixed amount. And then with your nitrous oxides and your chlorofluorinated carbons, it's in the hundreds to the tens of thousands. And so that's why these are much more potent, worse greenhouse gases. But you usually talk about methane because anthropogenic activities is definitely producing a lot of methane. And you'll see often a certain amount of methane being a certain number of tons of CO2, and then it'll have EQ on the end. And that effectively means how much of that amount of CH4 of methane is the same to the certain amount of CO2. So it'll always refer back to CO2 as a base. So the most common origins of these gases are shown here. So a great deal of these release carbon dioxide. You obviously got your combustion of your fossil fuels in power stations, in transport, and within chemical reactions such as the creation of steel and cement. That will naturally produce CO2 due to the chemical reactions occurring in those processes. But where we have methane being produced is it usually in anoxic environments, so it's anaerobic breakdown of organic matter in environments such as waste management in landfill sites, in agricultural and land management, in rice paddies, and in livestock. And that's due to a particular type of organism called a methanogenic archaea, which is like a type of bacteria, but while it's not actually a bacteria, it's as different to a bacteria as we are to bacteria, but they look and they basically look exactly like bacteria, and they're singular molecular organisms. But what they do is in anaerobic conditions, they break down organic matter to produce methane. And so that's why ruminant animals have them in their gut, in their stomachs. And that's why they release methane in cows. And that's why swamps smell like methane, like natural gas, because you have that methane emanating from them. And we create these environments through landfill sites and rice paddies. We create these anaerobic environments where methane is then released. So that's how we're releasing methane. Nitrous oxides then are released through transport, through the combustion of nitrogen, and through aluminium smelting due to the actual chemical reaction that's occurring. Very potent greenhouse gas, not released on the same scale, orders of magnitude as carbon dioxide or methane, but still very potent and very dangerous, and we need to get a grip of those emissions. And then when it comes to fluorinated gases, we'll discuss it a little bit in the second session, but we're talking about refrigerants here, usually aerosols and the like. These are materials that release chlorofluorinated gases. Well, these are materials that either change between gas and liquid depending on the pressure and the temperature. And so we use them for moving heat around in heat pumps and refrigerators and freezers and such. So yeah, you've obviously seen here that you've probably seen graphs like this in the past. We're talking about the levels of carbon dioxide increasing over time. So the atmospheric CO2 levels at Hawaiian Observatory at Mauna Loa is showing a sharp increase since the 1960s here. And interestingly, the sawtooth pattern here is actually due to tree cover in the northern hemisphere. So the winters and the summers are giving these kind of sawtooth patterns as we go up, as generally we release more CO2. But it just shows you how much of an effect tree canopies, when they shed and when they grow leaves, have on the global CO2 level, which is quite impressive, I think. But, you know, cynics might look at this and go, well, this is a zoomed in, you know, short-term, increase in what's an overall, you know, up and down trajectory. But when we look at CO2 levels over time, it's not really up for debate, because the ice core data of the last 10,000 years shows unanimous consensus across various different ice cores taken all over the world, most in Antarctica. And all these data points, all these different all these different extractions show the same data. We can see a sharp increase during the mid to late 1890s, which is when the Industrial Revolution began, and we started burning fossil fuels in enormous numbers. Interestingly as well, I don't know if you can see, there's a slight dip after the year zero. And that's actually, the increase there is due to the expansion of the Roman Empire, which I think is really cool. But it shows you just how much anthropogenic activities are affecting our environment. As empires expand, they cut down trees, you know, they burn the biomass around them, and they start making quicklime and such, and releasing CO2 to make cement and such. So yeah. And again, if the cynic was to look at this and go, well, this is again too zoomed in, well, you can see that whilst there are enormous increases and decreases in atmospheric CO2 levels over the last hundreds of thousands of years, the current levels and the current expansion of CO2 is completely unprecedented in the last 500,000 years. And there's no doubt that the scientific consensus is that this is due to anthropogenic activity, which is mostly increased due to the Industrial Revolution. So we're already seeing a lot of impacts in the news, of course, of the greenhouse effect. That's either from flooding in certain areas to wildfires and climate famines. So the impacts and the effects of the climate change is being felt all over the world already. But how do we, how do we talk about local effects? So I just wanted to ask quickly, what effects have we seen in the UK or Wales, and how has global warming already affected you or your business? I just wanted to ask a question if anybody cares to jump in here.
There's been a lot of flooding in South Wales.
Absolutely. So we're seeing these kind of extreme weather events in the UK already, aren't we? People don't really remember a time when we had such an intensity and a high frequency of these extreme weather events. If it gets really hot in one place, it gets cool in another. If it rains a lot in one place, that water's got to come from somewhere. And so we're seeing these kind of disruption of natural cycles, natural phenomena and weather patterns that's causing these extreme weather events, aren't we? Anything else? Any way that, is there any way or any ways that climate change is already disrupting your activities at all as businesses so far?
Yeah, one thing for me, Rodri, is that I sell a lot of my products into the garden industry, and the seasons are all over the shop.
Wow.
Pretty much moving on maybe 2 or 3 months, perhaps than what they were even a couple of years ago.
Wow.
And it really, if you get extremely wet spring, for instance, it wrecks sales, absolutely floors them. And conversely, if it's too dry as well. So this instability in the weather pattern massively affects selling things into the gardening industry.
Yeah, that is terrifying, isn't it? I don't know how you'd circumvent that either. It's just seeing it across the board. We're obviously seeing great disruptions to supply chains and problems in financing and problems with security and resilience due to energy crises and such. So I guess we'll get into them in a little bit now. But we've obviously seen, as we already discussed, droughts, flooding, heat waves. It's already affecting thousands of people across Wales, and it shows no sign of abatement, unfortunately. It's just kind of what we have to deal with now. We're seeing the collapse of railway infrastructure, of the sea encroaching upon settlements and upon the built-up environment, flooding, and the high street affecting businesses. In my hometown of Aberystwyth, there's frequent storms are now battering the seafront and causing great damage. So we're seeing it across the board. So just a quick one about how will climate change affect SMEs? How will climate change affect your organization? Can you think about how climate change will affect your SMEs in any way? Any ways do you think that any adverse effects that are coming down the line that you're worried about? I guess I can jump in here and say what we're seeing already, and what we're thinking is going to happen is that we're going to see rising costs with inflation. We've already seen that a little bit due to international events, and with impending climate change and the undoubted migration of peoples and conflicts that's going to arise, and conflicts due to access to resources, we're going to see rising costs happen time again. This is mostly due to energy market price volatility, supply chain disruption, which is going to be we've already seen how international events can cause supply chain disruption, whereby piracy or Houthi rebel attacks in the Red Sea can cause supply chain or shipping directions past the Cape of Good Hope. It's causing a lot of problems for SMEs across Wales and beyond. So obviously going to have a lot of lost productivity as well. People with the hotter climates, overheating will be a problem. Disruption, migration will be a problem. So we're going to see loss of workforces. Financing might be trickier in the future due to uncertainty in the markets and uncertainty for lenders. We're going to see a lot more stringent building regulations by local authorities and regional devolved powers in the UK government coming into effect, either through green walls or biodiversity net gain requirements and such. And of course, we've seen a lot of market volatility already occurring, affecting all of the others in turn. When we're talking about impact due to climate change, we have to understand that it's not going to affect every human being exactly the same. So when we're talking about our contribution and our duty to do our bit, we have to consider that some people are going to be affected by these things worse than others. The wealthy are going to be less affected because they have the ability to get themselves out of harm's way a bit more than the others, and flee to safer harbours than compared to the members of our society that don't have that ease of access. Ethnicity too, it touches on the previous point. With age, it might affect older people worse than the younger generation, due to problems with overheating and ill health, and our health services being overstretched. A lot of the worst affected workers might actually be working outside, and so they'll be worse affected by the heat compared to people who are working inside and in air conditioning environments. And it'll affect people with disabilities obviously worse than people who do not. So we have to consider equity and vulnerability when we talk about the impacts of climate change on people. Yes, just wanted to quickly discuss about global emissions and our our contribution towards these. And so you often hear a lot of people say that, you know, there's not much point of us doing anything about climate change because China is doing this much, and it's China is the world's biggest emitter. But whilst China is the world's largest emitter, we need to understand the context of which this is occurring. And so if we were emitting you know, about 10% of the world's CO2 emissions, and China's contributing 27%. Well, if it's producing 27%, that means 73% of the rest of the world can't turn around and say that China is the worst emitter, when if we all said the same thing, then we're not going to get anywhere as a world, because we all need to do our own bit, don't we? And just because China is the largest doesn't mean it's 100%. And we also need to realize that China is the largest emitter for many reasons, but one of the main reasons is that we are in effect offsetting our carbon emissions to China because they are manufacturing what we consume, and they are manufacturing this at a rate that requires them to burn a lot of coal to do so. And that's why they are the world's largest emitters, because they have new coal stations propping up literally every month, if not every couple of weeks. And so we are effectively offsetting our emissions to them, and we need to kind of bring them along on this journey. We also need to understand the historical context of our emissions. If you look on the right here, you'll see that the United Kingdom, for the better part of over a century, was the world's #1 carbon emitter. That is obviously due to the reason that the Industrial Revolution occurred here, but it's a bit difficult for us to say to other countries in the world that they can't develop and they can't enhance their industries when we've done so and we've emitted our emissions, but you can't do it anymore because the world's in a pickle because of what we've already done. And so we need to kind of understand that there's a great historical context here. And when we look at our share of global cumulative CO2 emissions, it's substantial given how small of a country we are. We've been overtaken now by China and the United States, but our contribution is absolutely enormous. So we need to consider this when considering historic emissions. Okay, so I wanted to move on now and talk about carbon footprint. So we all have a carbon footprint. It is a measure of the amount of greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere as a result of the activities of a particular individual, organization, or community. And when we look about SMEs as carbon footprints, I wanted to look at the gross domestic, total domestic greenhouse gas emissions a couple of years ago. So this is all of the emissions from the United Kingdom, and surprisingly, business is only 18%, and transport is surprisingly, transport's only 24%, and business is actually 18%. I thought personally residential would be higher than this, agriculture too. But when we look at the breakdown of that 18% of that business, we come out with numbers like this. So if we look at the business sector overall, 99% of UK businesses are SMEs, but those 99% only emit 50% of that 18%, as it were. So 9% of total UK emissions come from SMEs, which is not an insubstantial amount. So even though the larger multinational conglomerate companies produce, you know, as much as 99%, so that 1% is producing 50% of the emissions, but we still need to realize that 9% of total UK emissions come from UK-based SMEs, and so we all have our bit in order to decreasing that total business sector emission amount. When we look at the bottom here of the realization of this fact, only 10% of UK-based SMEs currently measure their emissions. Only 22% from research that we've undertaken of SMEs understand the term net zero. 32% have switched to green suppliers, which is a bit of a no-brainer, really, in terms of reducing our scope 2 emissions, which we'll go into in a bit. And only 3% have installed their own renewable energy. So, you know, these are numbers that we can improve for sure, and we will need to reduce our contribution and do our bit. Obviously, it's not always easy for SMEs to install renewable energy, and it doesn't always make sense, which we'll go into in the second session. Okay, so to look at the average UK SME emission activities, it's obviously highly variable depending on the SME's you know, practices, operating hours, etc., amount of staff. But you're looking at about 40 to 60% of our emission activities are from just the consumption of energy to either electrify and power our activities, or just to heat or cool our buildings. So the vast majority of it just comes from just the energy that we buy, that we consume. 15 to 30% comes from transportation. That's through from commuting to international travel to like rail travel or business travel. And a non-insignificant number is waste management. So a lot of our emissions just goes towards, you know, what we consume, the utensils that we use, the products, the procurement, and that afterlife, that waste management. And then we have, you know, variable manufacturing, supply chain, and then water usage at the bottom. Well, this was just to give a quick glance about where most of UK SMEs' emissions come from. So to move on, I just, forgive me if you already know all of this stuff, but I just thought I'd cover everything. Net zero, what does it mean? How does it compare to carbon neutral? So these terms are often used interchangeably, and they're often sometimes with clever or deliberately confusing marketing are used as hybrids of each other. So I'll get into it in a second. But okay, so net zero means that any carbon emissions we create are balanced, cancelled out by taking the same amount out of the atmosphere. So we'll effectively reach net zero when the amount of carbon emissions we add is no more than the amount taken away. So if you take that at face value and then read the definition of carbon neutral, they sound pretty similar. Carbon neutral is making or resulting in no net release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But what is crucially different is that carbon neutrality allows you to use carbon offsetting. So although the terms net zero and carbon neutral both refer to the balance of emitted greenhouse gases, the distinguishing factor between the two claims hinge on compensated emissions. So with carbon neutrality, it allows you to compensate for your emissions, i.e. offset, outside of your value chain. You can purchase carbon credits and such. With net zero, to be actually confirmed or certified as net zero, you need to actually meaningfully abate, that is completely cut out and reduce the vast majority of your emissions, with certain standards allowing you to offset the last remaining 10%. So, you know, the standardization is a bit of a Wild West still around the world and in the UK, but there are now corporate standards coming into effect that will offer third-party peer review of a look at a given individual or organization's emissions, and they will then certify you as net zero. The gold standard is increasingly becoming the Science-Based Targets Initiative. So that's that SBTI you're seeing on the bottom left. This is a new American standard that's being adopted quite heavily in America and in the UK and Europe. But what they do is you pay them to do your homework and to look at your workings out, and or your, you know, a lot of companies pay a consultancy to help them do it, to calculate. They will then say, okay, well, this is your amount that you're emitting. We agree, or they don't agree. And then, you know, you will set a target of net zero by the year 2030, 2035, whatever. And then when you reach that target, they will certify you as net zero. So there's no ambiguity or debate. And, you know, companies will increasingly have to use these organizations, because effectively companies can greenwash, and they can say they've done this, and they can say that they're carbon neutral when they're not. And so these standards are going to become increasingly more important as the decades roll on, because we will need corporate, you know, sustainability and corporate awareness and good practice for these kinds of declarations. And so with the SBTi, they require you to actually reduce 90% of your emissions. But because it's pretty much impossible to reduce 100%, especially with scope 3 emissions, which we'll go into in a moment. But the last 10% of most companies, they'll say, okay, you can offset that. But the reason that that they do that is because to just say that you're carbon neutral is a little bit woolly, because this is a recent expose by The Guardian that from last summer or so, that revealed that more than 90% of rainforest carbon offsets by the world's biggest and most gold standard certifier are completely worthless. And so, you know, what a lot of these companies do is they buy rainforest, you know, and they usually, sometimes they're backed by, you know, big American or Canadian or British companies. They'll buy rainforest. They'll say, all right, well, we're not going to cut these trees down. Therefore, we're saving this much CO2, and we can sell a certain amount of, you know, credit to you guys to offset your activities. So effectively, a company like, I don't know if they do this, but something like British Airways can say, well, we're carbon neutral, and I think they say that they are. But they do it by buying these carbon offsets. And I'm not saying that all carbon offsets are dodgy, but a lot of them are. And we're not really going to get to where we need as a world, as a society, if everybody just offsets their carbon. They're going to be an important part of the mix, but we actually need to meaningfully reduce and abate our emissions in the first instance. And that's how we reach net zero, not just by purchasing carbon offsetting schemes. And so, yeah, just to give a quick rundown of our organization, MSPACs, just to give you an example of our emissions. I don't know if I have, no. Okay, well, just to quickly discuss the scopes. So scope 1 for any organization is your direct emissions. And so for most companies, it will be the CO2 released due to the gas boilers or the oil boilers to power the building, or to heat the building, or it would be from your company cars, or if you're manufacturing, it might be from the actual chemical reactions that occur to make your product, like cement and steel, etc. Or if you're composting, you know, you'll have to discuss, you know, like things like your waste products and methane emissions and such. So that's direct. For scope 2, it's to do with, so all emissions for a company can be broken down to 3 scopes, effectively. Scope 2 would be the emissions associated with your electricity or your heating if you don't own your building. So if you're a tenant, the emissions from heating your building will actually be scope 2. So it's indirect emissions is scope 2. Scope 3 is absolutely everything and anything else. So that usually comes to things like commuting, your water usage, your procurement, your waste products, your international travel, etc. It's a bit trickier to define, and it's a bit trickier to get a sort of defined number on. And you'll find the more that you investigate it, the more you'll find, and your emissions actually increase, which is disheartening. But it is actually a good thing, because you're actually getting a hold of, you know, what you're actually emitting, and it's the most actual, really realistic and honest representation of your organization's emissions. So just to look at MSPAC, for example, our current scope 1 emissions are 55 tons of CO2. It's a big building, 250 people here, 50 tenants, many labs, etc. A lot of activity. That building needs to be heated, so we have gas boilers to heat the building. So gas comprises the majority of the carbon emitted per annum by MSPAC for scope 1. Well, in general, completely. Scope 1, you know, the gas boilers are our main emitters. Therefore, for us, you know, transitioning from gas systems to utilize electricity will be the priority to meet our carbon targets. We'll go into this a little bit more in the second session, but that will effectively mean heat pumps, air source heat pumps. That's what we're going to do to decarbonize our heating source. For us, scope 2 comes from the grid. However, we are putting more and more solar here. We're hoping to have wind in a couple of years, potentially, if planning considerations change. And we're hoping to install more solar. Depending on what standard you use, you can offset your renewable energy generation against your scope 1 and 3 emissions. It gets a little bit complicated, a little bit tricky. You can do that depending on the standard that you adhere to. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol allows you to do this. The Science Based Targets Initiative does not. So it's a bit tricky. We ourselves are on a green tariff or on a nuclear tariff, so our Scope 2 emissions are effectively zero because we pay for a certification of a guaranteed origin of that renewable or low carbon energy electricity. So it really is as simple. There might be a slight premium compared to other tariffs, but it is one of the biggest and easiest and fastest ways for an organization to cut down their emissions is to go onto a green tariff. The question is if everybody was to go on the green tariff, is there actually enough energy that's being produced renewable? Well, that's a problem for the government really to see that there's a demand, isn't there? So I would advise all companies to do so. Scope 3 for our organization, by far the largest contribution is by the staff commute. And so that's why we're looking into car sharing schemes, cycle schemes, public transport, and hiring an electric or leasing an electric vehicle. But Scope 3 is a bit tricky to calculate, and so we've actually had a member of staff here do a life cycle assessment, and so we now have a proper grip on our Scope 3 emissions. Just a quick infographic here about what does a net zero world look like. Obviously not this cute and not this colorful, but it'll give you an example of what the kind of technologies we're going to be looking at. So everyone's going to need to decarbonize their heating, right? So we're going to be talking about low carbon homes, insulated homes, air source heat pumps, whereby they use electricity to produce the heat instead of burning gas or oil. Renewable energy, probably a lot of nuclear power, probably a lot of tidal power, hopefully in Wales. The debate is still out about electric vehicles and hydrogen or biofuel cars, but it'll probably be a mix of a bit of everything. I personally believe it'll be electric vehicles for the vast majority of transport, of personal transport in the UK. But really, we need to reduce our demand. So we need to actually move and invest more in public transport. Tricky in Wales, I know. But the larger, longer range vehicles like trucking and maybe even shipping and aircrafts and public transport or buses will probably be more hydrogen based because you don't need to refuel them as often, and the batteries will be infeasibly heavy if we're going to be talking about hauling a huge weight like that. So you're talking about hybrid or hydrogen buses or larger heavy goods vehicles, low carbon businesses, sustainable agriculture and forestry activities. So if we do all of these things, we'll be a net zero world, and that's kind of what it will look like. That's why policy is changing. So policy comes from the bottom up, top down. It's we have made a commitment as a country to adhere to the International Panel of Climate Change's COP15 to become net zero by the year 2050, and that is actually enshrined in law. We as Wales as well have made a commitment to be 2050, but we've set ambitions to get there even sooner. And obviously, we have our local authorities ourselves in Anglesey here. They have a net zero plan. And so these are open and public documents and plans that you can have access to and can go find quite easily online that will show how these policies will affect businesses and how businesses can get involved and how we can get information. And so I would recommend that I can share these slides after to find access to these documents to show exactly how our local authorities and our regional and our national governments are making plans to become net zero as these have become policy by now. This is we're part of a wider network of countries all over the world, obviously, that have committed to become net zero. So the vast majority of the 200 or so countries have made that commitment, with some obvious outliers like Australia, which has not. Some countries supposedly have already achieved it due to their vast forestry cover, like Bhutan and Suriname. What's interesting here, though, is if you could see like the type of shading on some of these countries, and that shows you the different scales of commitment. So some have discussed it, some have proposed legislation, some have created a policy, but some countries such as ourselves and France and Sweden and Denmark and Hungary have actually enshrined it in law. So what this means is that regardless of sitting governments, they can't rip up that agreement and then say, I disagree, we're going to kind of do it our own way, which is what's happened recently in America. But recent events in the UK have come close to that, with Rishi Sunak going back against some of their key policies, but they've kind of said that they're still adhering to the accord, but that's up for debate. I wouldn't have said so personally, but that's a political thing. Yeah. So I thought we'd have a quick activity. How are we doing for time here? So that's okay. So I thought I just put it over to you guys for a quick couple of minutes, just for us to discuss the co-benefits to SMEs of becoming net zero, or committing or pledging to become net zero. Can we think of any co-benefits that will not only, we obviously need to do our bit, and we need to morally and ethically make that commitment, but what are the co-benefits that could benefit our business by setting ourselves onto that journey to become net zero? What do we think? What can we think of?
It encourages innovative thinking, problem solving.
Absolutely. So problem solving, as I know, just to give you an example, when you commit to becoming net zero, you need to get a grip of what your current emissions are and what your current energy usage is. And so by doing so, you're having a look, just to give you an example for us, we had a look at electricity usage, and we realized, my word, why is that machine releasing so much electricity? Why is that part of the building requiring so much electricity? We wouldn't have, and then we've then went and reduced it, which is saving us costs and reducing our emissions. This wouldn't have happened unless we made that commitment, and by doing that commitment, we needed to get a grip of our emissions. And we've also, like you said, we've become more innovative, because one of the biggest and main, we'll cover this more in the second session, but rather than just throwing solar panels at everything, it is reducing demand, it is reducing inefficiency, it's reducing wastage that's going to reduce our carbon emissions the most. And then we look at things like installing renewable energy to produce our own electricity, to save us costs in the long term, to reduce emissions. But it requires you to think more innovatively. Think about increasing efficiency. Well, if this is requiring this much heat and that's pumping out that heat, well, is there a way of getting that heat to there, etc.? So it requires us to think outside the box. Anything else anybody can think of co-benefits to becoming net zero? Yeah.
Come in with one. I think the reputational piece, I think, is actually really relevant to a lot of people on this cohort. If you think about the products and services that you guys are all developing, they are there to help help others potentially get to their ambitions of being net zero. Reputationally, if you are able to demonstrate that you are doing it as well yourselves and how you're doing it, that reputational advantage, I think, would be massive, because there is nothing worse than having somebody preach at you about how to make things better while they're not actually doing it themselves. So it's a really core fundamental thing, I think, for all of you guys as you're starting up. The sooner you can embed these principles within your companies and then explain and show people how you're doing it yourselves and the benefits you found, it will make it easier to then sell or market your products out to other people and demonstrate the value of those products and those interventions and those innovations out in the market. And I think that's a really important piece here.
Absolutely. So that business reputation is an enormous aspect. Adopting carbon neutral practices can enhance reputation. Research by the Carbon Trust found that customers these days and going forward will increasingly expect companies to make those sound ethical decisions on their behalf, with green businesses attracting new customers. The other obvious one's the cost reduction. Swapping energy to renewable sources can help reduce our bills. We can explain how energy is used as in your business and reduce energy consumption and costs eventually. Security and resilience. We've seen how recent energy price shocks can affect our businesses, with many businesses going out of business due to it. Aiming for net zero can make your small business more resilient against market or national disruptions. If you are wanting to attract investment, becoming net zero or setting yourself on that path is attractive for investors and shareholders, because they're looking for companies with a long-term sustainable strategy that are less reliant on fossil fuels.
And just to build on that green investment, we do have a session next week with 2 investors who are looking at green tech and investing in green technologies and innovation. So we'll get some insight, but it's exactly that we've been able to track, and there are a lot of investors now that are specifically targeting this area because of the benefits of it. So not only, we're not just talking about it, we're actually seeing it and it's actually happening. So just wanted to flag that as next week's session.
Definitely. Good plug. And just to get that competitive edge, customers are willing to pay more for environmental products, especially with younger customers. It really is quite a seismic shift in consumption these days. They're willing to pay that little bit extra for sustainable products. Just wanted to quickly discuss, when we talk about becoming net zero, it is a medium to long term commitment. It's an investment of time, of resources, of money. But all the benefits that we just discussed are not, single-handedly arriving or reaped when you reach that target. You don't get all those benefits when you reach net zero. You get those benefits pretty much straight away. By committing yourself onto that journey, like we've committed to be net zero. We've seen those co-benefits come into effect straight away. It's not just something that happens when you reach the destination. And the Differ the Spark project is our internal energy usage and demand project, looking at how we use our energy here. And so as we discussed earlier, there's benefits of committing yourself onto the path, because we've now reduced our energy usage, reduced our costs because of our internal energy reviews that we're doing internally. The questions for Welsh SMEs, how can we decrease our carbon footprint? How do we become net zero? Which technology is best? How do we fund this? What's the most economical method to lower our costs? And of course, where can I find the information about this? So that's hopefully we'll be answering a little bit more in the green finance session next week. And in the second session, we'll be looking at these technologies in depth and which ones would be more beneficial for certain situations, and how do we decrease our carbon footprint. So it's also just to say that there are personal carbon footprint calculators available which break down our carbon emissions, and it gives you a personal carbon footprint. It's not super in depth. It mostly just looks at your travel, your work, how do you live, what kind of diet do you have, etc. But it's really quite a cool, fun metric to use that only takes a couple of minutes, and one is available at WWF. But it just gives you an example of how we compare against the UK average citizen and the world average citizen. And so if you just wanted to have a quick go at that later today, it's quite an illuminating activity. You can do this as an SME, as a company as well. So the Carbon Trust has a carbon footprint calculator, very light touch, but it'll give you a very simple understanding of the kind of scale of the CO2 emissions they're emitting. So it'll mostly just be touching on scope 1 and 2, looking at the heating. It'll ask you for like annual gas and electricity usage and the number of staff members you have, but then if you were to actually, and it'll give you a rough number of they could expect an organization like yourselves to be emitting. If you wanted to have an in-depth breakdown, a life cycle assessment, a low carbon review of to get into those nitty-gritty, the scope 3 emissions, you'd have to then come to an organization like MSpark or other external consultancies to have a look at your activities in more greater depth. But these are great tools to use just to have a quick look at your emissions. So how much time do we have? Do we have a couple more minutes? Okay, I'll quickly it's all a lot of this previous hour might have been a bit alarming and a bit negative, but I thought I'd end on just a bit of an overview of the positive of we're moving in the right direction in terms of the electricity, the grid. And so what we're seeing here is the amount of terawatt hours, the amount of energy that is being generated by various different sources across time, across the last 30 years or so. So what we're seeing here is the complete decimation of coal, which is really good news. Coal being the worst emitter out of the fossil fuels. with biomass being actual worse emitter than coal, but the science on the carbon neutrality of biomass is murky, so I won't get into that. But coal was by far the worst. We still have some coal power stations that need to come on short notice, just in case that we need them. But you'll see here how coal has completely dropped off the map, and renewables have taken its place more or less, with gas expanding as well. But we're seeing here is positive developments really in the expansion, in the rollout of renewable energy technology, most of which being wind and solar, and other renewables like hydro and small tidal projects, and smaller hydro projects coming into effect as well. But we're also seeing nuclear power keeping steady, but we will increasingly, I believe, need to have more nuclear power stations as the decades roll on, because there's no really getting around the fact at the minute that nuclear is pretty much the only technology that we know of that can generate at scale, dependably, in any weather, low carbon energy. And so we'll have to reach net zero, to have that quick base load contribution for our energy mix. We're going to increasingly need to see nuclear. It does have its negatives, obviously, but it's going to have to be a crucial part of our energy mix going forward. Just this is you can actually have a look via the energy dashboard or grid watch, and it shows you the current real-time breakdown of the energy generation mix. And so this is giving you an example of a breakdown maybe last November or so, where wind and nuclear. So that's so if we're looking here, so fossil fuels are generating 21 gigawatts, so 43%, but even more renewables and low carbon, so that would be nuclear, producing even more than that. So we're increasingly decarbonizing the grid. So that's a UK average overall, but the local electricity generation for North Wales in particular looks even better, obviously because we do have the offshore wind sites here in North Wales off the coasts of Rhyl and Conwy. So yeah, we have a 57% breakdown there of wind. So yeah, it's positive news. We're moving in the right direction, but we as a country need to move even further in the direction, phase out fossil fuels, introduce more renewables, introduce nuclear. And so yeah, we're coming to the end now. I believe Barclays are going to be coming in to talk about their scheme, their projects in a few minutes. But I just wanted to open the floor really. We've rushed through quite a lot of things here. How's everybody feeling? Are there any questions? Anything what we'd like to discuss?
Hey, Rodri, diolch am fawr. Yeah, really, it's Jamie from upstairs above you, I think, somewhere in MSPA. I've got a carbon capture energy technology development, so all those nice figures for growth in carbons, is obviously an opportunity for me. But there's a lot of talk, obviously, about the polemic around net zero and carbon. And obviously in Wales, we had a talk yesterday at Net Zero Forum in North Wales on RAP and the recycling and everything else that's coming on. It seemed very forced that this is what the government's telling us what we're going to do. One of the options for SMEs, or the opportunity for SMEs, is obviously that it's a tick box to say you've got ISO 40001 or whatever, which you can then be used as a net zero policy. Are you seeing buy-in in the next year, 2 years for net zero from businesses, from consumers, from citizens coming through? So the likes of all the different net zero platforms that are on this accelerator and various other ones, there's obviously a market for them. Is that what you're seeing?
Well, I think it's increasingly becoming part of public awareness and part of public lexicon. There's a hell of a lot of misinformation and disinformation and vested interests by certain political lobbies and groups and social media and such when it comes to net zero. There's a lot of misunderstanding of what it means, its comparison to carbon neutral. So it's a bit of a minefield still, but we're going to increasingly see with our commitments to net zero, that with the roadmap that the country's put down, that policies are going to be changing, and that's going to disseminate down to regional powers, to local authorities and such. And so I don't think it's going away anytime soon. It's going to increasingly become a part of public awareness. The younger and future generations are as active and as energized and furious about developments and the inactivity of older generations and successive governments in tackling these challenges. And so I don't think that net zero is going away anytime soon. Certain, like I said, the UK has actually enshrined in law that we've committed to net zero. And so for a successive government, in 10, 15 years at time to exit the Paris Climate Accord would actually be unconstitutional. And so I don't think that it's going to drop off the map anytime soon, if that explains anything.
Yeah,
I'm just going to build on that as well, because I think what we're seeing now, apart from, as Rodri mentioned earlier, some of Rishi's backtracks that we saw earlier on in the year, we're actually seeing more and more policies. They're either newer policies, or they're becoming implemented, or they're becoming more stringent in the way that you have to report these things back. And I know some of the companies on this accelerator are looking at how we can help with that reporting. And I think while at the moment it's still a bit cumbersome, it's not very easy, it's not that well regulated, I wouldn't be surprised if in the next decade or so we see huge amounts of regulation suddenly added onto this, because what I suspect we're going to hit 2030, realize we're nowhere near the interim targets that we've been talking about for 2030, and there'll be a real push then to see how we actually manage that. So all of the regulations that are currently in place that maybe aren't being implemented as efficiently or aren't being checked in the right way are going to start being, and it's going to become a lot more difficult to be reporting. So the sooner we can all get on board, get companies, get ourselves as individuals and get our companies in place to be reporting and doing things properly, rather than just as that tick box exercise, will be ahead of the curve. I think that's a real opportunity for Wales. We are ahead of the curve on the recycling, and all these new rules about businesses and the way that we're going to be recycling. It's clunky, it's sometimes a bit frustrating, but it does mean that in 5 years' time, when it becomes mandated by the UK government, which would have impacted us, we've already got it all in place. We're doing it. We can be sharing that knowledge and exporting that information out to people. So I think there's an opportunity for Wales to be leading in this and showing people the best, not just doing it for the sake of, but showing best practice, and that we're doing it for genuine reasons. I sort of waffled around my point a bit there, but I think I made it.
Brilliant. Great, diolch Debbie. Any other questions? Any other thoughts, guys? I think I might have bamboozled you all with by rushing through everything there.
Diolch, Rodri. If there's no more questions, then Lizzie will hand over to you for Barclays colleagues, I think. But just to say that if there are any questions, Rodri will be coming back to do another session a bit later on in the cohort. So if you do think of questions, then we'll have a bit more of a chance to do some interactive work in that session as well. But as ever, you've got my contact details. We'll get Rodri's contact details shared as well. So if you have any specific questions or anything you want to follow up on afterwards, please get in touch. And Lizzie, over to you guys, I guess.
Cool. Thank you both. That was really insightful. I learned a lot. So thanks for that, Rodri. So we are joined by a couple of different members of the Barclays Eagle Labs team. So I will be handing over to Chris shortly. So Chris is actually based in our Grange, so Tramshed Tech Grangetown site. So if anyone is based in the south, or if you're down here, Chris is always around and always super happy for a chat. So I'll hand over to you, Chris, to introduce yourself and kind of go through what you do with the ecosystem down here.
Thanks, Lizzie. So morning, everyone. I'm Chris Skinner. I'm the ecosystem manager for Barclays Eagle Labs, covering Wales and West. And it's really good to sort of join today. Nice to put faces to names, so I've seen in sort of copies of email trails and sort of off the back conversations where I've had with some of the businesses on the programs. So I'm here as the ecosystem manager for Cardiff. We're partnered with Tramshed Tech, and it's been really good to see the support that Tramshed Tech have been able to offer through these programs. And I'm there to literally complement that relationship with ongoing support. So For those that aren't au fait with Eagle Labs as an offering, we're here to help the startup and scale up tech community with a variety of support through programs, connectivity, so connecting with investors, connecting with mentors, and I'll delve a little bit deeper into that in a sec. And then some industry specifics, which my colleague Michelle is on the call with us as well today, and she'll run through more of our industry side. And kind of my role is split into two halves. One is sharing how Eagle Labs are there to support. Like I say, our programs are there to complement the work that MSpark, Tramshed Tech and others have been doing through product builder, scale up programs, and then the connectivity in terms of our mentoring. So the mentors that we have are alongside our trusted partners, including Codebase, Accelerate Her, Foundervine, Pash Ventures, Capital Enterprise. And those mentors come with a wealth of experience to really complement. Like I say, we're very much facilitators in this equation and providing that ongoing support. And alongside the virtual offering, there's me as an individual who's well connected across the tech ecosystem of Wales and West, with investors, mentors, corporates. So for businesses looking to get exposure, we'll run a series of events through the Tramshed Tech locations, which is where I'm in one of them today in Newport, planning our next event, which is around ESG next week, funnily enough. So like I say, it's a case where I'm there. I'd like to have one-to-ones with the businesses to find a bit more around where you are, but not to overwhelm as part of the program, and there to be an ongoing support and ear to lean on to understand each of you and where there's opportunities that I can support. To complement the Eagle Lab offering, like I say, there is our demo directory. So for those businesses on the call that are looking to connect with investors, imagine essentially a virtual Dragon's Den where you upload your pitch deck and your pitch video, and we'll send that out to our accredited investors who've told us sort of what industries and what sort of size of investment they're looking to make. Like I say, if anyone wants to reach out to me, my email's nice and simple. It's on our website under the location of Cardiff, where all my contact details are. But if anyone wants it now, it's christopher.skinner@barclays.com. Happy to set up Teams calls because I appreciate everyone's not knocking around South Wales. At some point, Lizzie, it'd be good for me and you to do a bit of a showcase and an Eagle Lab event across MSpark and get up there as well. So like I say, I'm keen to get out and see you guys. But in the meantime, if you'd like to pick up for a one-to-one over Teams, let me know and we'll get a call booked in for a one-to-one. Alongside Eagle Labs, like I say, we are a bank in the background. Not there is a requirement of you guys to bank with Barclays, but if there are requirements where you want help regarding your banking facilities, happy to pick up that conversation as well. But that's not compulsory to sort of leverage anything from Eagle Labs. All the support we offer is free. And it's there to utilize. Like I say, have a look over our website. Happy to go through one-to-one in terms of setting up a bit of a strategy of how Eagle Labs can support you. But it feels an appropriate time to hand off to my wonderful colleague Michelle in our industries team to talk a bit more specific on what's relevant for you as part of Eagle Labs and our industries.
It's Chris. Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks so much for letting us have some time with you today. I'm joined, it's not just me, so in the Climate and Nature team with us today, we've got Dan Millard-Hill, who's on the call as well, so I'll hand off to him in a second. So yeah, working with the industry team, I'm part of the Climate and Nature Innovation. Throughout Eagle Labs, there is a lot of tech agnostic sites, and then we have industry teams that fit throughout. So we're one of those, alongside gaming and esports, health tech, cyber. Chris, what have I forgotten? Or Dan? Always forget something.
AI.
But AI, there we go. Probably one of the biggest ones that filtrates throughout everything. It's also one of our newest, so forgive me for forgetting that one. We run a series of programs and events and support specifically for climate and nature. So what that means is anything that fits within energy tech, agri-tech, food tech, construction tech, anything within that clean tech space. We have got a centralised hub. One of our labs now is just in Cambridge, has had a £2 million retrofit to become our climate tech hub for the UK. But it doesn't really matter which Eagle Lab that you're associated with. Our support is available through our ecosystem managers like Chris, or through ourselves. We run a virtual proposition. We've got partnerships with Carbon 13 and Sustainable Ventures, who will also offer specific mentorship, as Chris mentioned, and we've got experts on hand that can support with lots of different things. Carbon 13 are also running some sessions for us. So we have monthly sessions with them in 2 series. So one of them is exploring climate tech, and the other one is getting ready to scale within climate tech. The next event is on the 27th of February, so next Tuesday. Happy to send out an invite for that. And then there's a follow-on one on the 7th of March, which is exploring the oceans and harnessing the power of the oceans with our partners in Carbon 13. Always happy to talk as well. So we're really looking at how we can build out the community, how we can bring together all of you guys, cohorts that we're working with, who else is working within that climate tech sector, how we can signpost to other different partners and businesses to support the scale and growth across the community. I'll hand over to Dan for some of the other programs that we have got running. Cheers.
Thank you, Michelle, and good morning all. It's really nice to meet you, and thanks for the invite and being able to just share what we are trying to achieve and how we're trying to support you all. So as both Chris mentioned and Michelle may have just alluded to, there are some programs and partnerships that we have, and one that currently is running and will start a new phase this year is one with Codebase, and that's very heavily focused on the corporate and startup connections. So they're bridge programs and leading to that bridging that gap between the startups and the corporates and those issues and concerns that they come up against, be it as a startup and how they're moving forward, or a corporate company that is looking for innovators to come in and support with their challenges. So one of the current ones that's about to go live next week for applications is Opportunity Northeast. They're running at very heavily focused on Scottish energy tech transition and moving away from the gas and oil. And how can they move into a more sustainable energy plan, I guess. And then linking that one with the other program that we have is Sustainability Bridge is transport and micromobility. That is going to be going live around, application will be live in April and looking for a start in July. So again, that might be something that might fall into your area, especially with micromobility and the way that transport in cities now is becoming one of the biggest issues. So how can they come up with challenges? How can they overcome challenges and work with their way forwards? And then just to, again, continue the climate and nature community that we're trying to bring together, we also have a coffee morning that we've started up, and we will be running monthly. So it's the first Tuesday of every month that we're very happy to share our link to that and bring you along on there. We will have specific topics each month just to talk about, but also allow just everyone to come together and discuss any concerns, anything that they're up against, challenges, or even best practices that they've experienced to date. So again, there's a huge array of people that will attend, and they'll be from different areas and different subjects that they've all specialized in over the last few years, or some that are coming in and maybe changing tack as well. And as Michelle said, more than happy to, again, take any emails, questions or concerns, any advice. I say advice loosely, but we will help you with our network of connections and corporates throughout.
Thanks, Dan.
Michelle,
sorry, just something that I forgot to mention. Thanks, Dan. That was great. It's just, I don't know if Lizzie, if you'll be able to share our contact details. So if anybody did want to have a chat about their business, sort of where they're at the moment, if there's anything that we can do to, more than happy to have one-to-one conversations. Yeah, just wanted to mention that. And also where we fit in as with Barclays Eagle as with the rest of Barclays. So Barclays have got a really strong proposition and commitment to sustainability and net zero and to supporting businesses to scale and grow. So Eagle Labs sits at the base of that to talk to startups and founders and feed into that throughout the rest of Barclays. So we have other areas like sustainable impact capital. So once your business is scaled and you're Series A, then we can look at, there is a pot there, there's a fund there where Barclays will look at those investments into business. And there's also unreasonable impact as well, which also invest into business, but it's sort of as you've scaled and grown. So we are working at the with those earlier stage businesses to support them to hopefully get to that stage, and we can support throughout. And we're very well linked in with the rest of Barclays, which brings me on nicely to Dale. I'm sure it was Dale that I spotted on the call and not Matt. Hi, Dale. Yeah,
Brilliant,
so
that's great.
Dale works for our specialist customer services team. So I'll hand over to him and he can tell you about some of the other support that's available to you. Cheers.
Brilliant, that's great. Thank you, Michelle. Can you hear me okay? Just a thumbs up. Yeah, perfect, brilliant. So my name's Dale Young. I'm a specialist client solutions manager here at Barclays Bank. I'm one of 9 people within our team. What we predominantly specialise in is that we specialise in supporting new to bank customers or existing customers on a wide variety of solutions and needs. So we can support customers predominantly on cash management solutions. You know, there's a lot of talk about the bank base rate now is increased, so it's quite favourable whereby we're having meaningful conversations with customers on deposits. We also talk about international trade as well. So as businesses start to scale up, they might also think about trading internationally, and therefore they probably want to talk about ways of how they can mitigate foreign exchange rate risk or ensure that when they do tend to export, that they want to ensure that they're mitigating risk as best as possible, and that is where we can also help. But just recently, we've introduced a new initiative, which is absolutely fantastic and something we're really excited about, and it's whereby we're having meaningful conversations with customers on net zero. Okay, it's a new initiative. It's probably come out roughly around a year. And the calls that we're having with conversations have been absolutely fantastic. So what we're there and planned and designed to do is if we have any customers potentially thinking about banking up with us or bank with us, and they've already started a net zero plan or they have one in place, what we can do, you can book an appointment whereby you can have a conversation with us. We can talk you through that plan, let you know what kind of support and initiatives are available within your area through the government. And we can also support you in terms of reaching your net zero ambitions. So most customers probably may kind of have a plan in place, but they're looking to reduce their carbon footprint by maybe 5% a year. So we can help them on that journey and handhold them through the process. Okay. In order to have a review like this, as I said, you don't necessarily have to be a Barclays customer. We'll be willing to take the call, but what we'll probably want you to at least think about before reaching out to us is, you know, have you started to form a net zero plan? Are you looking to invest in any green asset, whether that's solar panels on an electric vehicle, or do you have, or have you kind of started to measure your carbon footprint? Okay. Now, if you've done any of those, what you'll do, you'll have a conversation with either myself or, again, one of my colleagues. What we'll do, we'll talk you through the plan, talk about next steps, and we'll set yourself goals in terms of where we expect you to be within the next 6 months. We'll also look at providing you with a follow-up appointment as well. So it doesn't end on that one conversation. If you feel you're happy to, we'll engage with you with 6 months. So we'll also book a meeting at the end of that call. There is just something I just wouldn't mind sharing with you. It's just a link. I've not used Zoom much. I usually use Teams, so hopefully this does work. Can you see that okay?
Yeah,
we can see it, Dale.
Yeah, brilliant, fantastic. So what we've got here, we've got a sustainability for business page, and I do believe this will be shared amongst you all by Lizzie. So thank you, Lizzie. So what we've got here, we've got a little bit of kind of information which signposts you in terms of what support could be available to your good selves if you are looking to invest in a green asset. We do work with a third-party company around that called Propel, but there's more information there. Or if you would like to bit of insight in terms of how to get started when it comes to measuring your carbon footprint, there's also some elements of resources here. But if you'd like to speak to a net zero specialist like myself, you can either contact me directly. My name is Dale Young, and I'll ask Lizzie to share my email address afterwards, if that's okay, Lizzie, in case anyone wants to reach out to me directly.
Yeah.
Or you can actually request a call back by clicking this option here. So if you request a call back, that will go through to our centralized team. And what our team will then do, they'll pick up your inquiry, they'll have a conversation with you with a view of booking you in with the net zero specialists. So just before I finish my piece, I'm just going to share a video which talks about in a bit more detail in how we've particular supported a client on his journey in becoming more sustainable and in terms of reducing his carbon footprint. So I'm just going to share this. I'm just going to do the video now. Hopefully you'll all be able to hear it.
Has anybody else got sound?
I've not got sound on that one.
Sorry, have you not got sound there? I don't know.
No.
There's anything I
It
need
might
to do
be
there,
if you change your if you click on the little microphone at the bottom left, you might have to change it to like system or something like that. It might be because you've got a headset on. So if
I've got share sound. Shall I click that? I've just got.
yeah,
This must be it. Try that.
Comfort of your own home, of your own office.
Oh, we've got it with an echo, Dale.
Dale, if you mute yourself
Sorry,
and then press play, that should be fine. I think your microphone's picking it up probably.
I'll try that 1 second.
They just love technology.
There's always something.
Yeah.
Everything was going so well until that
I know.
point.
I know.
1 second. Yeah.
I'm Dale Young, and I'm a net zero specialist for Barclays Business Bank. A net zero specialist is a representative that's able to support customers.
Dale, it's still echoing.
Yeah, I think what we could do, I can share the link, can't I, Lizzie? Would that be the best bet? And
Yeah, I think you just need to mute yourself.
yeah, I've tried to on my device, but it doesn't seem to.
I can mute you. If you want to try one more time, I'll mute you. If not, well, I'll be able to send it to everyone. If you try once more.
Just while we're trying to sort this, you might recognise you will get a link to the video, but Dale is the star of the video he's trying to send you, which he's super proud of.
Oh.
It's definitely worth the watch though. We'll send the link out to you afterwards if we can't get it to play now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening with that, sorry.
The eligibility criteria. Number one has the business measured their carbon footprint. Number two.
Yeah, it's not working, Dale. Are we able to?
Yeah, sorry about that. It doesn't appear to work. Sorry, Lisa, I think you're talking, but you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I'll make sure it's sent out to everyone.
Yeah, and you've got my details. The video is only roughly around kind of 3 minutes long, but if you do want to reach out to me, Lizzie will send out my details and we're happy to have a conversation further around the support that will be available to you. Thank you.
Fab. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. It's really good to hear from the actual people, kind of what the opportunity there is for everyone on the cohort, and just kind of see the face behind the offering is always really nice. And yeah, so thank you for joining us, and I'll make sure to send out all your details and all relevant links to the cohort so that people who weren't able to join us today as well, they'll be able to see it all as well, and I'll add it into our e-learning portal. But yeah, so if anyone does want to get in contact with the team, let me know and we can yeah, we can make sure that happens. So fabulous, thanks for joining.
I think from my side, Lizzie, it's just a case where just knowing what wider support there is available to the great work you guys are all doing at the moment is really nice from my perspective. Obviously, we've had a trusted partnership with you guys for some time, and sort of just seeing how that's grown and the wider support, and especially with this kind of looking at that Pan Wales approach, I think although limited in terms of our visibility, not the support available is all virtual, so you're not disadvantaged regardless of geography. So like I say, the offer is there if anyone wants to catch up one-to-one. I know I've caught up with a couple already, but it's a case where if there is that additional support required by me or the wider team, feel free to reach out to us, and happy to set that time aside. But no, really enjoying seeing how things are going on with the program, and sort of really good to see the collaboration. Although virtual, like I say, it'd be nice to get a bit more out and about with things, but it's really good to see how we're connecting across wider parts of Wales, and businesses that naturally wouldn't be on my radar and Lizzie's radar are now engaged with some of the activity we've got going on. So really pleased to see how this has come together as part of the EPP, and sort of really excited to see where things go with this.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Chris. And yeah, I think, you know, everyone prefers in person, but being able to have that virtual option as like a way to start conversations is ideal. It means everyone could get way more connected than before. Fab. Okay. I think we'll wrap up there then, unless there's any questions from the cohort. Has anyone got any questions for anyone on the team? No? Okay, if you think of anything afterwards, let us know, and we can, like I said, I'll be passing on everyone's details, so that's no problem. I think the only thing for the cohort that we need to flag for the end of this week is that I've sent a marker out for a showcase that we're running in London. So if you could reply to that, just so I know for definite who is coming and who isn't. If you've got any questions, let me know, and I'll be sending out some more details around some other specifics of it later today. Yeah, I think that's it. So we'll wrap up there. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks everyone.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Nice meeting you.